Just a little something about CSM if you're not familiar. We think mission is a big deal. And so we're going to also make sure that we are clear about our mission. And so our mission is for Jesus through mission with students. For Jesus, we are non-denominational. We work with the full range of Christian schools around the nation, Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox. Through mission, we do believe that the mission matters. We realize that for most of our schools, the mission in a real practical sense is totally irrelevant. It isn't really affecting day-to-day practice or decision-making. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't, and that in an ideal situation, the mission is very much alive and vibrant and running through all of your various systems and processes. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but we are very mission-focused. And we are with students. We do believe that Christian schools exist for children. I've actually had Christian educators scold me to talk about child centricity. One person said, well, I'm Christ-centric. Okay, so let's just get that out of the way. Of course, I hope that everybody here on this call is Christ-centric. But if you are a Christian educator, if that's your calling within the kingdom of heaven, then the most Christian, Christ-centric thing you can do is to be child-centric. And one of the dangers we see in Christian schools, private independent schools in general, is that all the adults have the power, and so schools tend to move towards adult centricity and care less and less about the actual needs of the students and care more and more about pleasing the adults in the system. And so we have to constantly be pushing against that and making sure that all of our decisions are around what is best for children to see them thrive and to develop. Today, the material, it's 6 tips, and there's nothing magical about 6, except that, in a conversation with Jerry, our CEO, we were talking about doing, sections with, the 5 top tips. And being a Monty Python fan, I had to jokingly say, no, 6. And so when they sent me this title, I laughed because I knew that that's what it was a reference to. I don't know if you're Monty Python fans, but you would totally understand the context of it if you are. So a couple of things about today. At first I approached it as sort of like a life hack thing, like let me give you 6 little cute little things that can help you engage with your board. The reality is you can get that anywhere. I wanted to do 2 things today. I wanted to give you 6 tips that you probably wouldn't get from other places. And the second thing is I wanted to give you 6 tips that weren't necessarily about making your life easier, but about you serving your students better. And that isn't to say that a lot of this isn't going to make your life easier, but I want to be very, very clear and upfront. If you're doing what you should do as a head of school, working with your board, there are going to be times where doing what is right is actually going to make your life a little bit more difficult. And particularly when you're trying to institute organizational change, Carolyn knows this all too well right now. That sometimes being effective doesn't mean being popular. And so I won't lie, doing some of these things may just as well get you into trouble as give you success. But one thing's for sure, you can guarantee that the one audience that matters, that audience of one, as Dallas Willard talks about, he will be very pleased with you if you can move your schools in these particular directions. The last thing is that this is very 30,000 view. I've included 88 slides. Don't panic. We're not going to go through all 88, but I've included some so that when you get the deck, some of the slides will provide more detail. But don't forget, you've got Entheos. If you're an Entheos member, which I suspect you are if you're on here, you've got access to 300 different articles. You've got our books. You've got our online. The purpose of this is to introduce you to topics. And so please don't be frustrated by the sort of tertiary manner in which we may address these. Now, because there's the small crowd here, there's going to be room for more conversation. So I think that will be good. So tip number 1 in the 6 tips that I would give you guys is, Joshua, are you the head of school?
I'm the building principal, but yeah, effectively, yes, head of school.
Okay, there you go, principal. And Carolyn, I know you're the board chair, so we have both sides of the perspective.
Yes. Okay, we can role play, it'll be great.
That's right, we can do some role play.
Try some things out.
But the first thing is you got to know your context. there's a couple of different context lenses I want to talk about. The first context is, where is your school at in the growth cycle? The way you approach a board when you're a small school, maybe you've only got 6 board members, very much in the entrepreneurial stage, that's going to be very different than the way you approach your board if you're in a much more mature school. The board culture is more mature. The committees are all up and running. Everything looks, it's humming. You're really more polishing than you are creating or starting or founding. And so the first thing is, as a head of school, going into a school or working with a school, you need to sort of take some time to assess where is the board at. And the thing about it is, the board can be at different places at the same time. So I've included, again, just some slides here that just give you some indicators about the various life cycles that a school can be in, and just be knowledgeable that not all schools are the same. They're not all in the same place, and that's going to dictate sort of your approach to the board, given your specific context. The second thing I would say, as far as context lenses, is, what is your form of governance? And so, if you are a school that is a parent-run school, excuse me, then give me one moment. There it goes. Then this is what we would say. That's probably not good. Sorry. Actually, it's not good. So, you have this thing called a society model or an association model. There was a time in our nation's life, in the life of the Christian school movement, where it made sense. Because Christian schools, generally speaking, with few exceptions, came from a particular church. All the people in that church shared the common core of viewpoint. They were a tight-knit community. As a result of that, you could have some association parent-run organizations, particularly in the early years, and it would function and it would work. In today's world, that tends to not be the case. Even church-connected schools tend to have a lot of people from a lot of different denominations, a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different perspectives coming to work with the school. The other thing is that over time, what we see is that when you have a society model, that these parents are coming to vote on things that they don't know anything about, and they're coming from the perspective of personal self-interest instead of the interest of the school. So what I would say to you is, if you're working with a board, and we like to see the life cycle of a head of school at least 7 years. We'd love to see you stay at a school for at least 7 years. Otherwise, it's too much transition for the school. If I went into a school as a head of school, and it was a society model, and over the course of those 7 years, I could wean it away from being a society model to a self-sustaining board, I would consider that a great victory for the kingdom. I want to be clear, because in today's world, this has become convoluted because it can be confused with what's going on in many public schools, in which parents are being inappropriately blocked out of what's going on, that things are being hidden from them, all that. That's not what we're saying at all. In fact, we think your school should be very upfront about what it is you're trying to do in the lives of children and the way you're working with children. And then if you're a parent and you agree with what we're doing, then we have an intersection, we have a mission match, and then we're great. And so come on board. And if not, then you know not to come here. But what we cannot have is parents coming in with 1,000 different visions of what education should look like for their child, and trying to superimpose that on the school and start little civil wars and parent conflict. We need a parent body that is consistent and in the same direction. So, but the other piece, the other perspective is, are we an independent Christian school or are we church run?
Yeah,
because if we're church run, that adds a whole other layer
yeah,
to my interaction with. Now it's not just a one board I'm dealing with. It could be 2 boards and a pastor and a whole host of things. So
you just described what I have. So
yeah, exactly. And so as we begin to think about, well, how would I work with my board? I need to know, what the lay of the land is, and part of that lay of the land is it a church-run school? One of the other things before we pass it by is also, what is the model? And I don't want to belabor it, but a lot of Christian schools operate under what's called a Carver model or a policy governance model. I don't want to get into the weeds, except to say that you need to have a board in which the work is being done by the committees. That is where the work of the board gets done, is at the committee level. Now, Carver is right in theory that the board cannot delegate its responsibility for decision-making to another entity. But when you understand committees properly, you understand that committees have no power. They are the ultimate safe space for the operations and the strategic to come together and work without stepping on each other's toes, precisely because they have no power. And so we want a situation in which we have active committees that are getting the work done, that are bringing that to the board, and then the board as a whole is looking at that, reading the reports, discussing it, and then making decisions to move the school forward. So all of those are different contextual things that we have to be aware of. The other context lens is on board members themselves. And here's one of the great ironies, and that is, and Carolyn knows this because we've talked about it, I want go-getters. I want alphas and alphettes, right? If I can say that, right? I want people that are getting things done, that have been successful, that are going to come on board and be ready to roll their sleeves up and do things, but therein lies the rub. Because a lot of these people are used to being operational leaders themselves. They are used to walking into a room and having their voice heard and their way had. And now they're coming into a leadership role, but it's a different kind of leadership. They're moving from being Moses to one of Moses's counselors, if I can put it that way, right? And so steward leadership is very different than operational leadership. And part of what we have to do is we bring board members on and we talk about new board orientation, is we have to educate our board members about this new kind of leadership that they are walking into. And one of the particular things I want you to see here, it's the last point, is they can often bring preconceived ideas about their own industry into the life of the school. And oftentimes, those things can be harmful because schools are not banks or medical offices or accounting firms or, whatever. And so, in fact, let's look at that last lens of context that we need to look at, and that's the lens of the idiosyncrasy of private independent Christian schools in general. Christian schools are highly idiosyncratic organizations. They break a lot of rules that other organizations would go by. They create a lot of their own independent rules that organizations would go by. And so it's important as my board members come on board and as I am orienting them and educating them, that they understand the oddity of what the Christian school movement is at a variety of levels: business model, marketing, evaluation frameworks, just a whole host of things that if you applied other industry standards or principles or practices to the school, it would be a train wreck. And this is just some of the items out there that differentiate it. But I bring you to the top two, and that is your child and your money. There's nothing more visceral than your child and your money when it comes to your emotions. And schools have both of those things. They have your child and your money. And so that's very powerful in a positive sense, because if we can harness that in the right direction, we have the ability to get a level of volunteerism and a level of charitable giving that many other not-for-profits would only dream of having. But it's also true that if that starts to blow up and be mismanaged, it can turn into a train wreck very quickly. And so board members need to understand, and you need to understand as you work with board members, this context lens, and that is that Christian schools are their own thing. And we need to understand where they're similar to other businesses or industries and where they're different. Any questions about that before we go on to two?
No.
All right, tip number two. This is a little bit off the beaten path, but more and more this becomes a topic that I think is central, and that is know yourself as a leader. I was at a head of school retreat back in my old ISM days in beautiful Asheville, North Carolina. And I'll never forget, I was sitting next to a board chair, a head of school, and his wife was next to him. And his wife was talking to somebody else, and I was talking with him, and he started to share with me the struggles he was having with this board and some other struggles he was having. And for some reason, I don't know why, I suspect it was the Holy Spirit. I said to him, I said, well, let me ask you a question that sounds rather strange and unrelated, but are you getting 8 hours of sleep a night? Well, that's a very strange question when somebody's sharing, their troubles with a board member or whatever, right? But the funny thing about it is that his wife, who was in another conversation sitting next to him, she had her wife radar on. And she heard that question. And she stopped the conversation she was in and she looked over at her husband and she got the old arm on the hip, elbow out. I mean, she was like getting her Deborah on. And she just looked, she didn't say a word, but she just looked at him like, how are you going to answer this, mister? I just got to see that. Well, he just began to open up about he wasn't getting sleep. He wasn't taking care of himself. Well, we can't talk about being effective at working with our boards until we talk about, are we ourselves guarding ourselves and strengthening ourselves and making sure we're in a place where we can be effective leaders.
Is Caroline Must.
So it's important that we know ourselves. And so I want to talk just briefly about a couple places because there's all kinds of conversations and other organizations to talk to. But when I look at this, the first place of tension is your character and your temperament. So we all have a particular kind of temperament. At CSM, we tend to go by the Keirsey model of temperament sorter, but there are others. We like Keirsey because Keirsey has the largest amount of longitudinal data over multiple decades. And so I commend it to you. But you are not just a victim of your temperament. You also have this thing called character, and I'm using it in the technical sense of habit formation, self-discipline, resilience, these series of things that we can begin to develop as people who have a spirit and a soul made in the image of God. And so I need to be cognizant of my temperament, and we're going to talk more about that in another slide here. Because I bring to that boardroom the person who I am, and so I need to be cognizant of who that person is and how they interact with other people. The second thing is the tension of my talent as opposed to my skill and capacity. So we know from a great book, still relevant, called First Break All the Rules, longitudinal research by both Gallup and Barna over 20 years, frontline leaders, great book. And we know this difference between what's called talent and skills. So everybody on this call has talents, things that you are naturally predisposed towards, that you're naturally drawn to, that you're naturally good at. And then you have other things that not so much, that you struggle with, okay? And so we have to understand that as a head of school, here's the challenge you have. The sheer breadth of knowledge necessary in this job means that by its very nature, you are going to have to learn about stuff for which you are not talented. Mm-hmm. Let me give you a quick example. Most heads of school that I work with are former educators that have moved up through the ranks, and now they are a head of school. They love education. They love children. They're not much interested in money. They're not much interested in money. But here's the reality. If you are a head of school, if you're working with your board, one of the quickest ways that you can lose credibility with your board is to not know what you're talking about money and finance. So one of the things that makes head of schooling so difficult is it's an incredible breadth of knowledge that you need to have. Marketing, HR compliance, instructional capacities, the list goes on and on. So you have to know and be clear in your mind, where are your talent areas? But where are the other areas where, despite the fact that you may not like it, you're going to have to spend some professional development time to get up to stuff in these areas. And you're going to have to be honest with yourself about what those are. I've included some slides here, as I said. Mike, for coming in, I don't think you were here. There's 88 slides. We're not going to go through each one of them. Don't panic. But I've included a bunch of slides so that sort of the details. We're at a 30,000-foot view. You can get into the details. But this is sort of the matrix that Keirsey talks about with personality types. I need to know who I am when I go into that boardroom. I am an extrovert. At this point, probably you're already shocked knowing that I'm an extrovert. Okay, and here's the thing. That comes with pluses and minuses. And so what I have had to learn over 61 years through character development is to discipline myself to not be a victim victim of my temperament,
Mhm.
and to be able to be present with people when they're talking and listen to what they are saying, not thinking about the next thing that I'm going to say coming out of my mouth. And I'm not always successful at that because I'm hardwired to be an extrovert, but I have to be in this engagement with myself, my character, and my temperament, and I have to be able to do that. And you can see a host of other things here. Maybe I'm the kind of person that wants to rush to get into a decision, but the reality is that the board needs more time to discuss this in order to make a thoughtful decision. I have to take that high J that wants to just get to the conclusion, and I have to be able to step back and let the process take place. So the more I am aware of who I am in the Lord and in my temperament and other people, that's going to help me to be more effective as I work with my board. And by the way, this kind of stuff will help you be more effective in your church, in your relationship with your spouse, in your relationship with your children. This is just something that every leader really needs to understand if they want to be successful in the long term. I've got some quotes from a gentleman, Dallas Willard, here. If you've never read Dallas Willard, you really should. If you don't manage your own life and avoid what's called the hurried life, you will undermine your effectiveness. I don't know about you, but I had a German father, and the answer to every problem was work harder and put more hours in.
Yep.
But the reality is, when we study human performance, that is actually not the answer to everything. Now, does that mean there are not times that you need to work hard or have a stretch of period of time? Sure. But overall, these are the success strategies for enhancing your performance. It's better that your school has 45 to 50 hours a week of you at your best than 70 hours of you running on half steam, with your decision making and judgment affected because of sleep deprivation, your inability to get irritable, you're getting irritable with other people because your blood sugar is not focused right, and you're hangry. I mean, so many of the personality conflicts that we have that we want to attribute to some great spiritual total depravity is really as simple as, I haven't eaten well, I'm hungry, and I'm grumpy right now, and so I'm not being a really effective leader. So these seem like simple things, but I want to tell you, these are the things that matter. And before I ever start to think about working with my board, I have to start thinking about, where am I at? Am I attending to these things? And it's a big deal. All right, so that's tip number 2. Do you want to discuss anything about tip number 2? I feel like Tippecanoe and somebody too. All right. The third tip is know yourself as a school. So we've talked about knowing yourself, your own self as a leader. Your school has to know itself, and your board has to be your partner in insisting that that's something that happens, that runs through all of your systems and processes. So many of you have read Covey. You understand this principle. This is truly perhaps one of the top 3 to 5 principles of leadership out there. I feel very firm after the time working with leaders that this is at the top of the list, and that is the concept of beginning with the end in mind. Effective leaders know where they're going to go, and they actually trace their steps back with the discrete tasks that need to be done, the resource allocation necessary to make that possible, the personnel I might involve in doing that. Teachers do this all the time. If you want to create a great curriculum, you don't start with today and move into tomorrow. You start with where we want to end up, and you trace your way back from that position. And so that's what great leaders need to do. Now, there's another side to this coin, and that other side to this coin is what I'm going to say no to. So this is really important to understand as a leader, as a board chair, as a board member, that there's this tension between where we're trying to go, what we're trying to accomplish, and the discrete steps necessary. But also, part of that conversation means that I'm going to say no to some stuff. What are some things that I have to say no to give the bigger yes to these other things? And your great danger as a leader is this danger of the merely good. I know very few leaders that aren't overwhelmed with a list of good things they could do with their time that day. But the great leaders understand that they have to differentiate and determine the core things that need to be done. Now, why is that important, and how is that relative to knowing who you are? Well, if I don't know as a school who I am and the outcomes I'm trying to produce in the lives of my children, I don't know where to even begin that conversation. Tacitus said thousands of years ago, for the captain who has no harbor as his goal, every wind is evil. And that's what we see when we don't have clear alignment with our identity and the outcomes that we're trying to create in the lives of people. We think we have a mission, but we have as many different missions as we have people in the room. And so we run around chasing our tails scattered. So from CSM's perspective, there are three core documents that you really need. One of these is the preview of the board, the mission statement. The other two, the profile of the child and the profile of the teacher, are really something that we work on operationally, but let's be real, we are not going to pass a portrait of the child or a profile of the teacher without running this by the board. This has got to be some level of conversation, right, between the two, and they have to all be in alignment with each other. So what do I need to know? I need to know my mission, my core essence, my fundamental identity of who I am, and that needs to be short and pithy and direct. And I've included some other slides in here that you can look over to talk more about that. But this is a big deal because most schools I work with, their missions are just flat out atrocious. First of all, I mean, literally some of them are like multiple paragraphs. Second of all, I could throw that mission up next to 100 other Christian schools in their market, and you wouldn't really be able to tell the difference, okay? Your mission has got to be a distinguisher of who you are. Ideally, it separates you from the rest of the market. But that's not enough, because the irony of this is that for the mission to be powerful, it has to pop, and for it to pop, it can't be comprehensive. The mission is not the place where I'm going to talk about all the stuff I'm trying to do. That's in a different document, and that document is the profile of the child. The profile of the child are the 4, 5, or 6 specific outcomes, whole child outcomes, by the way, not just academic, that we as a school have committed and said this is part of what we are trying to accomplish in the lives of children. So CSM is not very, I mean, look, if you want to have core values, that's great. Core values mean nothing to me. I want to see what you actually produce. That's what I want to see. And so I want to talk about what outcomes we are trying to create in the lives of children, because now, again, in that Covey-esque fashion, now that I know where I want to go, now I can begin with real strategies to trace my way back. I can begin to assess what are the resources necessary. I can begin to assess what are the kinds of personnel and people that I need to accomplish that mission, not the mission of the school down the street, not the mission of the school that I heard at the last conference, but our mission and the things that we want to accomplish in the lives of children. And of course, that leads to the third document, the profile of the teacher. And really, we could say beyond the teacher, it's really the profile of everybody that works there. And what this leads us to is two things. The first thing it leads us to is everybody in the organization asking the question, how does my personal life mission intersect with the mission of the school? Does it intersect? Or is there a problem there? The reality of these kinds of exercises is that some people may reach the conclusion that actually it's not the place I need to be, and that's good. But we want to be clear between your personal mission and your engagement with the school and make sure that those two things overlap. So that needs to happen for everybody in the system, including your board members. But the other thing that's important is that this is the foundational work for almost everything you do on both the operational and the board level. This impacts the way I approach my marketing. This impacts the way my case for support might be articulated. This impacts my performance, growth, and evaluation frameworks, okay? This can impact the way I create and utilize space, right? This impacts the kind of traits that I want to see in the people that I hire, okay? This is not just esoteric stuff. Even though for most schools, that's what it is. And if you're here and you're skeptical, I get it, because for most places, these are dead conversations. If I asked what the mission was in your boardroom, most of your board members wouldn't be able to tell me what it was, much less know what it really meant. Okay, so we cannot allow that to exist in our Christian schools. If you want to help your board, if you want to help your schools from top to bottom, the first conversation we have to have is this conversation. And this conversation might be over the course of a whole year. But once I know who we are as an organization, what we're trying to do in the lives of children, and what are the characteristics and traits I need to see from the people in our organization to make that happen, now we are all moving in the same direction. I want to say real quickly, when you look at the research, and I've talked about it, this is a field that both myself and my friend Simon have spent a lot of time in with faculty culture and performance and all of that. It's so funny when you talk about faculty. I'm going to use the example of faculty, but it's true of boards too. When you talk about faculty that have come out of a dysfunctional or not a healthy faculty culture into a faculty culture like this, one of the things they say repeatedly is, at first, for like the first few weeks, I was freaked out. That's a technical research term, right? Freaked out. Okay. So I was freaked out because it's almost seemed campy. Like I'd go to these meetings and everybody was always talking about the portrait of the child and what is the impact of this decision on children, and what characteristics and what professional development should, and I just thought it was like campy. But then you talk to them 2 months later and they say, I would never go back to the old system. I would never go back to the old system because the mission and the things that we were trying to do in the life of the child were alive. They were common conversations. They were jumping off of the website into the day-to-day practice and decision-making of our school. So sorry I took a little bit too much time on this, but it's so important. I can't tell you, there is a sense, I don't want to overstate this, but there is a sense as a consultant that until this work is done, it's very hard for me to walk with you into excellence. I would almost say it's impossible to reach excellence until these conversations have been threshed out and had, and they are ongoing conversations. I don't just create a list one day and the conversation is over. That's when it just begins. That's when I just begin to explore as a community and to go on this journey of meaning and significance and impacting children. So yes, sorry, go ahead, Carolyn.
Well, I was just going to say, Bill, that when you made that comment about what we are doing, we need to ask, how is this going to affect the kids? I mean, I'm embarrassed 2 years in, and I'm thinking, when did we ever ask that question specifically? I don't think we ever did. I mean, it was kind of nebulously there, but oh my goodness. Thank you. Game changer.
Oh, it really is a game changer. And I would say when you think about paradigmatic realities as a school leader, the constant pushing back against adult centrality is definitely top 10 material. We have to do it. And here's the irony, real quickly. If I give the adults everything they want, they end up being miserable.
Yep.
But if I keep the focus on the children and keep guiding them to keep their focus on the children, they begin to have careers and experiences with the school of great significance, life-changing significance. It's like so many things in life. Sometimes the stuff that I get easy is not the stuff that really brings me joy and pleasure. Sometimes the stuff I have to wrestle with is the stuff that gives me meaning and significance. And that's never more true than in this. So that's really great to hear. So this is sort of this is half of a joke and half of a reality, okay? So like I said when we were beginning, part of me wanted to develop this sort of life hacks approach to this. Let me give you 6 cute little strategies. And then the more I thought about it, you can go anywhere for that kind of cute little strategy stuff, right? But one of the cute little strategies I would commend to you is lunch with your board chair. We actually have a book that's a devotional book for heads of school to have devotions with their board chair. So the most pivotal relationship on the strategic plane is your relationship as a head of school with your board chair. It doesn't mean you don't want to have a great relationship with the rest of your board, but it does mean that the wise head of school develops a relationship and manifests and encourages that relationship with their board chair. It's really, really important. That's a bonus tip. All right, tip number 4, you must become a master at all things governance. So in leadership, we have this phrase, I'm leading from behind, or the need to lead from behind. And let me just say that goes double, triple, quadruple as a head of school. There is no more of a lead from behind position than being a head of school, okay? It's this great irony that your board is your boss, and yet they really don't, I'm just going to say it, they're largely incompetent for their position. They're just, nobody's ever trained them for it. And I don't mean incompetent in a hateful way. I mean it in the technical sense of they simply do not have the skills and capacity. That's why when we talk about governance, one of the things we talk about is the great need for professional development focused on your board to move these alphas and alphettes into and out of that operational mindset into a stewardship leader model. And what does that look like? It's so important. And so in order for you to do that, in order for you to lead from behind, you have to become a master at governance. For a head of school in a very short amount of time in their career should be the person that knows the most about governance of anybody else in that room. And you will have to work with your board chair and as your board grows with your governance committee to enhance that knowledge and spread that knowledge and make sure that your board has that knowledge as well. I'm not going to go through every one of these slides because there's a lot that we could talk about, okay? But I do want to get some of the core items, and that is there's a rhythm and a cadence to the board, and you must own that rhythm and that cadence. Think of the strategic plan as the breath in and out of an organization that happens every 3 to 5 years. That's the cadence. And we want to take that plan, we want to get it into yearly annual agendas. We want to take those annual agendas. We want to understand what is the operational piece, what is the governance piece. Your board then needs to take those governance pieces. They need to determine all the decisions that need to be made. Some of those are going to come through the strategic plan. Some of those might come from another document, like a accreditation document. Some of those are just things that need to be done every year. Every year you're going to recreate a budget, right? Every year you should be having at least an internal or an external audit, okay? So some of these things are just, they're stuff that just happens. And we need to take all that and we need to determine what are the major decisions that need or actions that need to take place during the course of a year, and what committee makes the most sense to lead that. And then we look at our board calendar and we want to get to a place where as much as is within our power, that meetings are focused and surrounded around a single decision that needs to be made. And that 72 hours ahead of time, the committee in charge of that has sent the information out, that our board has read that information, that they've come prepared to talk about it, and that a decision can be made. We need to get out of the world of 4-hour board meetings in which 30,000 irrelevant reports are given. It's nowhere's land. You should maybe have 20 minutes of administrivia and things that need to be discussed. The primary focus of that meeting, and in fact, I have a slide in here that outlays what a meeting looks like. The primary focus of that meeting needs to be making decisions. Here's why this is so important. First of all, it's important because the organization has to run. But the second thing is that idleness is the devil's workshop. A lot of board dysfunction is simply because the board has not been tasked and focused to do their own job. When the board is up and functioning and attending to the things that the board should be attending to and running in a particular kind of professional way, mischief happens a lot less, if at all. But when I don't have committees functioning properly and I have these hour-long board discussions where all kinds of, I think the technical term is crazy sauce can start to come up, that's when dysfunction can start to happen. So I want to keep my board focused, and getting the committees to do their job is a huge piece of the puzzle. We've got the 5 committees here. I've got some specifics on what it means to give a committee charge, what that would look like, the documentation and metrics that you want to start to include into those things. Here's an ideal board meeting, what a board meeting would look like. Notice that we are starting every board meeting with professional growth. And here's a board minutes. So again, we said it's going to be a 30,000 view today, but I wanted to leave you with some details as well. The other piece I want you to understand is the importance of professional development for your board. So I've got some slides here on that. And then the importance of evaluation for your board, and the levels of different evaluation. Am I evaluating not just the individuals or the board as a whole, but am I evaluating the committees and their effectiveness? And this isn't about evaluating to browbeat, but this is about healthy accountability in which I can support and help the board get better and better in its practice. So you must have included, you can see slides here about due diligence, about the various committees, about philanthropy in the board. I just pulled some key things, the great inversion, of course, power structures on the board. Boards can be great tools for power-hungry people. Bottom line, this is a lifetime journey. You're never going to arrive. My buddy Simon just finished the 3rd edition of our board book, and was already talking about different tweaks and fine tuning of different principles that he was making. We've been doing this for 20 some years, and we're still learning. I'm still learning. This is an ongoing challenge or journey. But make no mistake about it, as a head of school, you must become an expert at board governance. Anything we want to say about that?
I threw a question in the chat. Do you guys have an exemplar? And so I know that I've seen the board structure stuff through CSM of the board and the committees. Obviously, the church-run school, I mean, church-associated school, our structure is a bit different. Has CSM ever explored what that committee structure looks like with a church council, school board, then the committees and where they fall, and what that looks like as far as school board and head of school interaction with that?
So we've discussed it a lot on an individual strategic plan by strategic plan basis. And Simon and I have certainly talked about the need to maybe produce some more publications specifically on this. We have some writings related to it. But if I were honest, I think that there's much more stuff to plow here, if I were going to tell you. And some of it depends upon the structure of the church. There are certain churches where the person that really matters is the pastor. Let's be real. There are other churches where the elders board.
Yep.
There's other churches where you've got an elders board, but then you got this thing called a facilities committee. And a lot of the struggles center around the use of facilities and poor scheduling and not having a master calendar and things of that nature. So I'm sorry to be a weasel and not answer your question directly. But I think your question is a great question and one that I'm glad is in the recording because it's something we need to dive in more deeply. This is what I would say, just as a colloquial, experiential thing, having worked with a lot of schools. I can't tell you how many schools I've gone into that said there's this irreparable thing between the church and the school. And I just said, well, let me go talk to the pastor. And everybody was like freaking out, like, no, that's not going to happen. And I went in and I had an hour conversation with the pastor, and it was like the biggest nothing burger in the world.
Yep.
Some of this stuff is just people aren't talking with each other. There's a great guy, Chuck Evans, who used to be in private independent school leadership, and he did a presentation once that I think was so profound, and it was about the greatest dysfunction. He said, in dysfunctional organizations, people talk about each other, not to each other. And a lot of the problem with church-school relations is the need for you to set up mechanisms and channels where you are talking to each other, including planning together, working together. So I'm sorry if that's probably not as full of an answer, but that's where I would start.
Gotcha.
All right, number 5, you got to become a ninja at Christian school finance. If you've worked with us, you've seen this slide before. I almost didn't include it, but it's just too funny. And part of the reason why it's funny is because it's just too true. Most boards have no concept of Christian school finance. This is something I want to say. You can completely understand the budgeting process and still not understand school finance. They are different approaches, different lenses that we are looking at schools through. And so you have to become a master at that. Now, we don't have a lot of time because I want to open it up for more discussion. But one of the things that I use a lot is this concept of 3 levers. Okay. So here's the thing about Christian school finance that you need to understand. 2 things. The first thing is it's actually pretty simple. It's actually not a very complex financial structure compared to a lot of other business models. Even, that's why when people compare, whenever you have the college consultant come into your workshop and start giving you advice for a K-12 school, I immediately become suspect. Because once you get past we're both in education, the differences are completely, I mean, the similarities are gone. Like the financial structures of a college or university are there's so many more levers, okay, than this. So the good news is that it's very simple. Here's the challenge. It is brutally unforgiving. Brutally unforgiving. Carolyn knows this. So I want you to think about school finance like this. I want you to think of 3 levers that are sticking up, and I want you to think about underneath, they're all connected by a bunch of gears under the ground, okay? And whenever I go to move one of those levers, the other 2 levers want to move. So if I go to move compensation, anybody here know what percentage of your budget is compensation?
Yeah.
70 to 80%. So when I go to move compensation, I can't just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to click my Ruby heels together 3 times and we're going to increase faculty compensation. No, that doesn't work that way. If I want to increase compensation, one of these other 2 levers, if not both of them, want to move. I either need to charge more tuition, or I need to have more students in my classroom, or a little bit of both. Otherwise, that compensation thing is never going to happen. And in fact, let's look at it the opposite way. As long as I refuse to move that tuition lever, or I only want to move that tuition lever up like, a couple percentages, because I'm worried about what parents can pay, then guess what? Those other levers are not likely to move. So I need to understand the relationship between these 3 levers, and I need to communicate this to my board, and this needs to be part of every board orientation, the understanding of school finance. I literally I'll tell you a quick story. I try not to tell stories, but this is so funny because I taught on this years ago. And as I walked out, I had a gentleman who I worked with. He was a secular educator, but he owned multiple Montessori schools in the Washington, D.C. area. And we were friends. And as we were walking out, he laughed and he said, I wouldn't normally do this. He said, but I have to show you this, having just walked out of that workshop. He said, this is an email that I just got from a parent. And literally, the email was 3 paragraphs. Okay, so here's the thing. The first paragraph was complaining about how high the tuition was. The second paragraph was saying, and we're not paying our teachers enough. And then the third paragraph is, we have too many kids in our classroom. True story. True story. Your parents, your board do not understand school finance, and you must take the responsibility to educate them about it. It's critical. And there are other aspects of school finance that we're not going to get into today that we could talk about, but we could talk about strategic cash reserves. We could talk about a whole host of other things. The only other thing I want to say about school finance is it's not a conversation, it's a formula. And in that formula, what you must understand is that inflation affects you more than it does other industries. And so many schools have a budget that has the same dollar numbers, but what they don't realize is that they're losing significant buying power with each year that passes. And so inflation is the great enemy of Christian schools, and it affects you at an accelerated rate because you are a fundamentally inefficient system that does not lend itself well to creating efficiencies. What does that mean? That means you can't run away from tuition increases. Well, you can, but it's not going to go well for you. So the other comforting thing I would say to you is there is no correlate between tuition increase and enrollment. And anybody that tells you there is doesn't know the research and doesn't understand the industry. People don't leave schools because they cost too much. People leave schools because they don't perceive the value. In my prior firm, we did tens of thousands of surveys a year, a mountain of surveys. We would come and survey, we would do post-exit interviews. So we would talk to parents 3 months after they'd left the school. The schools would hire us to do that. That's when they tell you the truth. They won't tell you the truth up front because they want to get those teacher references, right? What is the number one reason people tell you that they are leaving your school? It costs too much. So here's the funny thing. Something like 42% of the people that left those schools and said it cost too much, that was their presenting reason, went to schools that charged higher tuitions. When a parent looks at you and says it costs too much, particularly if you have effective financial aid, right? So that you're in a position where no family should not be able to afford you, right? You just need to be willing to apply for financial aid. When a family looks at you and says it costs too much, what they really mean is, I don't see the value. And that's critical for the board, because if you don't hear that, you're going to get into the death spiral. You're going to keep suppressing your tuition. That's going to decrease your teacher quality because you're not going to have good compensation. Therefore, you're not going to be able to hire excellence or retain it. There'll be little spots of excellence because people are Christians and they do all kinds of things in a Christian school. But the reality of the situation is the quality of the product delivery is going to go down, down, down. Your enrollment will continue to go down. You have to stare your fear in the face. God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. You either believe it or you don't. You got to get out of this mentality of privation, and you got to lead your board out of that mentality and help them to see the reality. And the reality is that there's plenty of money out there. Your constituents have a lot more money than you think they do. Maybe not all of them, but most of your constituents are in the top 3 deciles. We just came out with an article in Entheos, the very conversation that we're having as a nation right now about the gutting of the middle class. Part of the result of that is that the wealthy have really, really, really made out well. And so here's the reality of Christian schools. If Christian schools are to survive and be accessible, the wealthy have to pay more than it costs so that the poor can afford it. I'm going to say that again. The wealthy have to pay more than it costs so that the poor can afford it. And if the wealthy on your board or if the wealthy in your parent body don't like that, there are plenty of other schools that they can go to. But this is what must happen for us to fulfill our kingdom call. Any questions about that? What we just covered? I'm getting scared now that I'm not serving your needs. Or is this at all helpful? Talk to me.
Yes.
Joshua?
Yeah, certainly resonating, yeah.
Okay. The last thing is 2 clients, 2 children. So your board needs to understand that you actually have 2 clients. You have the parent and you have the child. And the irony is that the primary client is the child. They have the most at stake, but the secondary client is paying the tuition. Parents often have ideas for their children that are highly developmentally harmful. It's just the reality, okay? I know I'm shocking everybody on this call by saying that. And yet it is their child. And so how do we develop a relationship with them in which they see the value, they're willing to pay the tuition, they want to be our true partner in working with this child? And so let's acknowledge first our secondary client, the parent. And at CSM, what we would say to you is you need to develop a organization-wide relationship and action plan that answers all these questions. And that has to start at the board and go all the way down throughout your institution. Teachers have a place in this. The administration has a place in this. Your groundskeepers have a place in this. I mean, this is everybody is responsible for driving enrollment and retention in a Christian school. So the key factors for your board are, first of all, just understanding modern parents and where they're at, okay? So you have to educate them on parents, and that the worst thing we can possibly do is give parents everything they want. We need to give them what they need, and we need to be really good about giving them what they need, but not necessarily everything that they want. In fact, really good parent relations teaches you how to effectively say no as well as it does to say yes. Mm. So the first thing is we have to give awareness to our board. The second thing is we literally have to train our board how to respond when parents try to go around the head of school and subvert the leadership and go to the board. Literally, we have to. This is why it's so important with professional development and things like annual retreats and things of that nature, that we actually set and we do role play. Like, I need to actually exercise the synapses that connect these things so that when the actual conversation comes, it comes naturally. So it's critically important. The effective board knows how to work with parents. They know how to steer parents to where they need to go, and they know how to do it in a way where the parent doesn't feel like they've had the nun rap them on the wrists with a ruler when they did it. And that starts in the boardroom. We could go down throughout the entire organization system. So we have to be able to be effective with parents and to develop a relationship with them that lets them know that we own their child. The second thing is we've got the child. So I want to talk, here's the confusion. We have 2 clients, right? We have the parent and the child, but then we have 2 children, okay? We've got today's child, which belongs to the operational group, the head of school and his or her team, okay? They're responsible for today's child. And then there's tomorrow's child, and that's the responsibility of the board. In fact, when we talk about the difference between strategic and operational, really at the heart of it is this concept. That if I'm getting in operations too much as a board member, I'm focusing on the wrong child. I need to be focused on tomorrow's child. Now, I want to say one thing, and this is where I'm gonna be honest with you and say that I'm going to bring a little bit of my own professional angst, and I hope that my professional angst is a blessing to you and not just me being a cynical, angry consultant. But one of the things that we see in schools that we go into over and over again is that we are stuck in the 1950s and 60s in so many Christian schools. Like we are still little rows, 40, 45-minute instructional periods with 3-minute crossover time and a 20-minute lunch with no breaks. Everybody's lecturing. We are preparing children for the world of yesterday. That's what we're doing. We're preparing children for the world of yesterday. And this is a challenge that you're going to have as you work with your boards, because here's the thing. Your boardroom is full of people who the old formula actually succeeded for them. In fact, they are where they are at today because of the old formula. And so telling them things like, we need to start considering adding the trades, or we need to start teaching children entrepreneurship, or we need to start going out into industry and developing internships in the junior and senior years so kids can go out, or we need to start approaching our instruction differently so that we're not just lecturing all the time. We need to actually involve kids more into it. I mean, those ideas, people just can push against them on the board level. They don't understand them. And you but you should begin to educate your board about the world of tomorrow. This is a great slide. This is from 2017, and I can assure you COVID has only consternated this. I went to see if they had any more recent numbers. I couldn't find them. But in 2017, if you asked teachers in the United States how well they were preparing people for industry, and then you went and asked industry how well you think they did, there is a 38% differential between the two perspectives. Mm. We are in the world of AI and automation. If your job has a pattern, it is going to be replaced by a non-human here very quickly. Or there will be a small group of humans in any given profession who are running the AI. So it may not be that lawyers are gone completely, but you're going to have a lot less of them. This is not just a blue-collar job experience. This is a white-collar experience. And so, we have to start to ask ourselves, what are the jobs of tomorrow that don't have a pattern, that can't be replicated, that are in demand? Let me tell you what those are. Carpenters, electricians, plumbers. That's one group of people, okay? Many of us come from a background where there's this false dichotomy of vocational training as opposed to intellectual cognitive training. That's a false dichotomy. I can be really smart and read the great works of Western civilization and still learn how to be a carpenter. In fact, I know of one particular carpenter that theoretically was a pretty smart guy. I'm just going to go out on a limb, okay? So we need to start to look at our schools differently and say, do we need to take a revamp of the whole way we approach it? Do we need to integrate? When we interview students, these are the things that students are asking. Why can't I learn more about the trades? Why can't I learn more about life skills? I got students in a calculus class, and all the parents can think about is, are they going to get a 5 on the calculus AP when the children are saying, I don't know how to do my finances. I don't know how to do a budget. Nobody's talking to me about investment. I'm just curious, how relevant do you think that calculus exam is going to be compared to these sort of issues? These are the kinds of things that our students are looking for in the modern world. And we need to begin to adapt our programs, if we are not already, to start to meet the needs of these things. The other things, the second little set of lists, is just our approach to education. We have several little silent crises happening in the lives of our children, and our board members are simply not aware of it because they are still stuck in this paradigm that school is about preparing children for college, not about preparing children for life, of which college may be a subset. That's a very different way to look at it. And the reality is that we pay a lot of lip service to these other pieces, but when I go into a school and I start to really analyze their programs, their practices, their communications, their emphases, everybody's talking about how important it is to have a whole child. Everybody's talking about how important spiritual formation is. I want to use profanity. I'm just going to say BS. Okay. BS. What they care about is, are my child passing the test? Is my child going to get able to get into this Ivy League college or next level placement? By the way, you might want to ask if that's the best route for your child, given what's going on. I mean, that's a question every Christian parent has to ask themselves. But I know a lot of colleges and schools where I could send my child and they would lose their soul. So what good is it to gain an MD and lose your soul? If I can misquote scripture a little bit. So there are a whole host of these other things: getting kids outside more, getting kids more unstructured, inviting kids to participate in the actual formation and implementation of some of our activities. We talk about creating leaders, but we wait until the senior year and decide that all of a sudden we're going to have these false programs that are going to create leaders. No, we need to start talking about, what does it look like to be a leader in kindergarten? What does it look like to be a leader in 4th grade? What does it look like to be a leader in 8th grade? We need to start all along the process about what leadership is. And here's the key: if we want that to happen, that means we have to start letting go and letting them actually do some leading. And here's the great thing: if you let them get involved, if you let them participate, now they are driven, now they are motivated, now they have this crazy thing called a love of learning.
Mm.
Oh, if you're not careful, you might start to create kingdom, world-changing, monsters if you're not careful. So this is what we have to do. We have to communicate these things to our constituents. Just real quickly, and I don't want to belabor it, and I'll open it up for conversations. I know we're over, but I'm happy to stay. This is the last school I went to. I'm glad the name's not on here. This is the life so many of our children are living in our schools. This is insane. You would not abide this kind of schedule in your employment. There's not a break in here before lunch. Look, 11:41 to 12:21. Now, my buddy Simon, who's a great scheduler, says the minute you start to see these kind of odd numbers, you know it's crazy sauce, and it's so true. 40-minute crossovers, oh my goodness. By the time I get settled, it's time to leave already. How much real instruction is going on there? How much time do I as a teacher have to implement different pedagogical methodologies as opposed to just lecturing all the time? Not many. This webinar is a great example. There is a big amount of knowledge necessary to communicate in a short amount of time. So what does Bill do? He lectures. Okay, so we have got to, by the way, I love this slide. This is the brain patterns measured by MIT of children in the traditional classroom. Yeah, it's so exciting for them. So these are the kind of things that we need to do as board members as we work with, we need to do as leaders as we work with our board. We need to lead from behind, and in the process pull them into the future, a future where our students are going to have to live long after many of us are gone.